Mrs. Block, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I just want to continue along the lines of some of my colleagues, but also just to establish an understanding about PSPC's role when it comes to the real property that the Government of Canada holds, as well as the Treasury Board Secretariat's role. So PSPC is the real property manager for the Government of Canada. Is that correct?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. PSPC manages most of the office portfolio for the Government of Canada, roughly a quarter of the real property holdings if you think of square meters of office space or other kinds of special purpose space. And PSPC also manages a large portfolio of engineering assets, infrastructure, things like dams and bridges.
Okay. Does PSPC provide any sort of oversight to the property that we own in other countries?
No, as previously indicated in my opening remarks, PSPC's role following Treasury Board policy, Treasury Board Secretariat policy, is to provide the appraisal services.
Okay, so I'm wondering if both you and Ms. Tattersall would be willing to table your opening remarks to the committee.
Absolutely, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. We used to receive them ahead of a committee meeting and would be happy to have those in writing. So when GAC purchases property, are those properties registered with PSPC? Where are they registered?
Well, with regards to PSPC, we do not have a registry of properties outside of PSPC's portfolio, with some very limited exceptions. So I can turn to Treasury Board to complete that answer.
So GAC would be the custodian for the real property, and you can either acquire it or it could be Crown lease when they have it. Okay,
so I know that you spoke about the real property holdings of GAC. I would appreciate it if you would table that list that you referenced to the committee.
I think I asked how many. I think okay. GAC officials, I would feel more comfortable if you got it directly from the department and their holdings.
I will do that tomorrow, for sure. So who writes the guidelines for real property purchases on behalf of the Government of Canada?
So we have a Treasury Board policy that sets the framework, and then within that, there's a requirement that in each custodian department, so GAC being a custodian department, has a senior designated official that is appointed responsible for the management of real property within GAC, and they would have a real property management framework that they're responsible for that would set out how things are done within GAC.
So the Treasury Board Secretariat role, and I'm quoting, in procurement includes developing, implementing, monitoring, and renewing procurement-related policies and instruments. That it also evaluates business proposals, monitors bidding processes, and ensures compliance with policies and standards. What we've heard today is that you only do that once a purchase or an acquisition is over $10 million. Is that correct?
So maybe first, when we talk about real property acquisition, it's the directive on the management of real property that applies, not the procurement policy.
Okay.
And so, as I said in my opening remarks, we set the administrative framework, and then if an acquisition or a disposition is over the limits that a department has, it would come to Treasury Board for authority.
Thank you. So where do the departments get the funding for these types of purchases? Is that budgeted for in the annual budget of the Government of Canada?
That's a great question. I'm going to flip to a page. So most custodians will have a capital budget. That is where they get the funding for investments in real property. So, for example, GAC's Vote 5 capital budget, for 2024-25 is $192 million. So they have a capital budget that is responsible for those expenditures, which is then voted on through the estimates process.
So they have this pool of money that's provided to them in the budget, and then through the estimates process, do they provide a vote highlighting what they are actually spending this money on?
So it would be considered sort of A-based funding. So they have so many real property assets that they have A-based funding to help manage all of those assets. And that's in their Vote 5, and that would be in their estimates.
So because
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ms. Atwin, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you everyone for joining us today and our witnesses. I'm joining from beautiful Fredericton, New Brunswick. Our average home price here is about $297,000. So I want to help, Canadians understand this. I want to understand this as a member of Parliament as well. So maybe if we can just start at the beginning, and perhaps Mr. Quinlan, if you could, perhaps this is for GAC officials more so, but what is this residence used for? Mr. Barrett suggested that it's for the, sole use, exclusive use of our one representative, but what is this residence actually used for?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would agree with the premise and the question that this would be a question for GAC officials, and PSPC would not be the appropriate department to answer.
Okay. Ms. Tattersall, would you like to add anything there?
No, I think GAC sets out the mission requirements for that official residence. They'd be best positioned to respond.
And I understand the previous property was estimated value of $13 million. Is that correct?
Could be confirmed through Chief Appraiser, Interim Chief Appraiser, Madame Bouchard, but that is also my understanding. Madame Bouchard?
Oui, merci. En fait,
Thank you. The $14 million you saw was the current asking price for the previous residence.
So can perhaps Madame Bouchard or anyone, could you speak to the key differences between this residence versus the previous one that we've now offloaded to purchase this new one?
donc, oui, je peux vous en parler brièvement.
I can speak to that briefly. The goal of today's discussion was to talk about the transaction for 111 West 57th Street. The information I have on the other report is limited. Also, given that the residence is currently up for sale, I need to limit the information that I can provide on its appraisal. What I can say is that the unit currently up for sale was larger when compared to the one we are studying today. The Park Avenue residence had a better view than the recently acquired property. It's located on the 12th floor of a 17-story building in a residential neighborhood in the Upper East Side neighborhood, which is mostly residential. And considered quite desirable to live in. Meanwhile, the property acquired on West 57th Street is in a building that, a heritage building with an annex built on. The unit in question is on the 11th floor in the annex, the first residential story of the building. Everything below that is non-residential. Annexed onto it is the famous skyscraper that can be seen as part of the New York skyline. I would say, overall, the location of the unit within the building is different, as well as the location of the building within the city of New York, and the size and view of the unit. Those would be the differences between the two units. Thank you very much.
I'm hearing a lot about location, and certainly, more of an ideal place perhaps for some of the work that is done and conducted in that residence. I come to understand there was also some issues with code. Can anyone speak to the previous residence not being up to code or up to perhaps accessibility standards? Is this one of the, parts of the conversation that would have gone into this new acquisition was around accessibility or meeting codes, or, can you speak to why we have this new residence?
I would start perhaps by, again, indicating that these decisions were decisions made by Global Affairs Canada, and PSPC provided the appraisal services, but the decision really belongs to Global Affairs Canada.
Great. Well, I very much look forward to asking them these same questions tomorrow as well. So I certainly appreciate your best attempts at explaining some of the thoughts that I think are going through many of our minds right now. And just in general, as my time kind of runs down, have you personally dealt with any similar cases like this where a residence or real property was bought to replace one that was being sold?
What I can speak to in the context of PSPC's responsibilities, notably for the office portfolio, is that we regularly look at our assets that we own and assets that we lease, and make a number of decisions in order to right-size the Government of Canada's office portfolio. And in fact, following the last budget, we are following government direction to significantly reduce that office portfolio over the next 10 years, and that will require us to dispose of a number of properties that we currently have and acquire new leases in certain cases, and the properties that we will dispose of, many of them, again, following government direction, will be put to contribute to be converted into housing. So decisions are made in that regard, and I can speak to the responsibilities for PSPC. But going back to this particular transaction, Global Affairs Canada would be well suited to answer your questions.
Thanks, Ms. Atwin. Ms. Spignola, please, for 2.5.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Bouchard, I understand that the appraisal of the Park Avenue residence is not available because we certainly don't want to lose our negotiating position in the sales process. That being said, would we be able to review it under embargo? Or without the ability to share the document? I would not be able to answer that. I'm unable to say whether there are certain conditions in which the appraisal could be shared. Chair? I would need you to weigh in on this. Would it be possible, in your view, to request the appraisal for the Park Avenue residence so that we could review it under embargo?
Committee agrees to view it confidentially. So done.
Yes.
We'll set a date. By next week, perhaps? Would it be, Ms. Bouchard, have you seen that appraisal? Is it in English and French already?
J'ai vu le rapport.
Yes, I saw the appraisal.
Already?
Le rapport, non, il est seulement.
The report? No, it's solely in English.
Just on this issue?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're just going to suspend for a couple seconds for the Liberals for this. But the idea is to have it in confidence.
I just want to make sure
Sure.
that.
We'll suspend for 2 minutes.
Yeah. What are the requirements? I mean,
Okay, with you, I'll ask you to withdraw, and we'll reconsider it after after perhaps your next round, Mr. Jarre is suggesting we all talk offline at the break about it. Perfect. Continue. You have about 2 minutes.
Merci. Rapidement,
Thank you. Very quickly, Ms. Tattersall. Does the Treasury Board carry out assessments of monthly costs of a department, or do you only look at purchase prices over a certain limit? Is there also a limit for monthly costs? There's an annual and total limit. In total for every apartment, or for each one, for example? And what is the annual limit?
J'ai l'information pour
I've got the info for Global Affairs. For GAC, I'm going to give it to you in English.
purchases, limits. It's all available online. So
Okay.
after this, I'm happy to send to the clerk also
S'il
the
vous plaît.
link to all the transactions, and it'll
Merci.
be there for GAC and everybody, if that's more
Oui.
helpful than me
Oui.
saying it all out.
Merci.
Okay.
Oui, vous pouvez me l'envoyer, il n'y a pas de problème.
Yes, you can send that my way, no problem there. Generally, in Canada, there's a policy for purchases by PSPC and other departments of a call for offers. The current purchase on West 57th Street is part of the 5 least expensive units viewed. Why did the government not go with the cheapest unit?
Mark and I know each other well, so we're always butting into each other. Il y a ce concept de l'optimisation des ressources.
There is the concept of best value. But this is an investment as well. There is a balance between costs and program objectives and government priorities.
An apartment that's more expensive but is accessible, supports the greening government objectives, may be best value. So low cost, the lowest cost is not always the best value.
Thank you very much. Mr. Backrack, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just as a question to you, Mr. Chair, are we doing 2 6-minute rounds here?
This is just, it's the opening is 6 minutes, and then 5-5, 2.5, 2.5, 5-5, repeating through.
I'm just confused because Ms. Vignola's round, she just had 2 6-minute slots, I believe. So I'm just looking to you in terms of...
No, her actual in questioning time was about 2.5, 3 minutes. We're letting everything run a tiny bit. Yours ran a bit late as well. But it was probably 6 minutes because of the suspension. It was probably a bit long because of the suspension. I'll restart your time. Go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. My first question of this round is for Mr. Quinlan, and I know in the wake of the ArriveCan scandal, PSPC has committed to a number of procurement reforms. I'm curious whether those reforms will affect the real property procurement process, and if so, how?
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Donc, je suis le sous-ministre.
Thank you. So I am the Senior ADM for Real Property Services within Public Services and Procurement Canada. We have a number of collaborations with our procurement colleagues. I would be happy to provide you, after the meeting, with a more detailed response on the application of measures to improve real estate management.
So just to be clear, Mr. Quinlan, that's a yes, those reforms will affect real property procurement. However, a more detailed response would be required.
Donc, encore une fois,
Again, Chair, here we're referring to certain reforms in procurement. Given that I'm the Senior ADM for Real Property Services, and given that there is a collaboration between Real Property Services and Procurement Services, I would I commit to providing the committee with a list of reforms that could potentially impact real property. But I would like to assure the chair that real property will not be unduly affected by the reforms under discussion. In the context of real property, there are procurement processes, and the reforms to procurement could potentially affect real property. And via you, Chair, it would be my pleasure to provide a detailed response for use by the committee in writing.
I think that would be of interest to the committee. So if you don't mind, Mr. Quinlan, providing that response, that would be much appreciated.
Great, thanks. And we do have, we've passed a motion that all responses are required within 21 days. So if you could do that.